What's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be going over, as I explained, links. Next up is going to be impacts, quite obviously what happens after the link, but then from there I'll be going over a couple different aspects of case, and probably do that for about the next week or so, into the next week. And then from there I'll start getting into like more argumentation stuff and like, kind of discussing what actually happens in debate. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and get right on into links. But before I even start talking about links, I think I'm going to need to preempt or kind of explain, starting with uniqueness. So what uniqueness is when you think uniqueness, you want to think difference, and it's going to be the difference between the affirmative case and the negative case, right? So quite obviously, when you think about what debate is, the AF is going to have to advocate for the AF, and uniqueness essentially is saying that, or like what happens is the reason that the AF and the neg are distinct or unique from each other is the fact that the neg can't advocate for the same thing as the affirmative, because that would simply be affirming, and quite obviously as well, the affirmative must advocate for the, for the resolution. They can't advocate for something else or try and shift away from the resolution. So with that said, that's essentially what uniqueness is coming down to. The importance of it is a couple of things. One is that it provides exclusivity to both sides, right? Preventing the AF from becoming the neg, or the neg becoming from becoming the AF. But it's also important because it shows, it essentially leads us into like how debate happens, right? Because if we didn't have uniqueness, essentially that would, and we didn't have, this defined difference between the affirmative and the negative, then that would mean that debate simply wouldn't be able to happen, right? The reason that I can't stand up as a negative speaker if the AF is saying, we should join UNCLOS or something like that, whatever the topic might be. The reason that I can't stand up as a negative speaker and advocate for, this, I don't know, maybe advocate that the United States should, I don't know, like pass some law that's going to help like combat the drug crisis or something, or the United States should invest its money in Medicare and Medicaid because that's going to save thousands of lives or something like that, right? The reason I can't sit up and just advocate for that is because I need to be responsive to what the AF is doing, and at the same time, there's no reason that the AF can't just advocate for the same thing, if that makes sense. Either it's going to happen in both worlds, or it doesn't happen in either, right? So the reason uniqueness is important is it's causing a difference to form between what the AF is and what the neg is, and that difference is what's being debated in the round, right? We are debating whether we should have, implement the AF, and that's the difference between the AF and the neg. We're debating whether whether we should stick with the status quo, right? And that's the difference between the AF and the neg. So with that said, the importance there is that causes clash. So again, as I explained, difference is what you should really think about when you think about uniqueness. It's a much more common discussion to have in LT than you would have in a PF round. But what's important about that is it causes clash, right? That's how we have debate. To the point at which we have to engage on what the resolution is actually saying whether we're the AF or the neg, the AF having to advocate for the resolution again, the neg being able to, advocate against the resolution or advocate for an alternative, that is distinctly unique to the negative because it is, mutually exclusive with the affirmative. That, what I mean by that is saying that the neg can advocate for a counterplan or something like that, as long as that counterplan is distinct from what the AF can do, right? If for instance, with the last federal debt topic, right? A lot of people are advocating that we should increase our infrastructure spending, and the reason the AF can't do that is because the AF is prioritizing reducing the debt, so we can't increase the debt and also reduce the debt at the same time by, passing infrastructure spending, but then also trying to reduce it long term, right? So that was a common neg argument that would be kind of this alternative to what the AF is doing. So with that said, the reason all of that matters is that uniqueness is something that is commonly used at the very top of PF cases, and a lot of PFers don't even know it. Essentially, when you read a card that talks about what is bad about the status quo, by status quo I mean what is currently happening, what's happening in the very present without modifying it, in any way, shape, or form, right? If you talk about what is happening in the status quo and about how that's really bad, that is a uniqueness card, right? We're saying that currently there's a problem, but however, when you vote for the affirmative side, we are unique because of the fact that we are able to solve for this problem in some way, or at least we're trying to solve for it, right? The neg can do the same thing at the top of their case, talking about what is currently happening, why that's good, or maybe even talking about maybe what needs to be improved in the status quo, but how the AF isn't going to be able to do a good job of it, right? Those are the uniqueness cards you're reading at the top of your case that are essentially doing a good job of trying to define the topic, right? At the point in which you are talking about what is currently happening, and then trying to prove how you are going to change it, that is providing your uniqueness, right? You're saying that this is what's currently happening, and I am addressing it in a certain way that is unique to my AF side or to the next side or what have you, right? So all of that is important because not only of this whole interaction between like what you're doing under the resolution, and also how that makes you unique and how that creates this difference between the AF and the neg, but that is what leads you straight into the link, right? So at the point in which a lot of PFers and most LDers as well are using these uniqueness cards, talking about what is happening in the status quo, what is happening right now, that leads you into the link in the sense that if there's a problem and we need to solve it, We need to figure out how we're going to get that solvency, and that is what the link card does, right? So the purpose of reading a link card is that you're trying to relate whatever your advocacy is, whether that is a status quo on the negative side, whether that's the status quo on the affirmative side, whether that's for whatever the resolution is, and you have a specific policy action that's going to do it, or even if that's a counterplan on the negative, right? As I just talked about, infrastructure spending. We have this idea of we could provide. The neg says we can provide infrastructure spending. The AF says rather we should be reducing the debt, right? That's a counterplan to what the resolution is saying. No matter what you're advocating for, the link's job is to relate whatever your advocacy is to an impact in the round. And so there's a couple of important aspects of a successful link, but overall, as long as you're able to kind of relate those two things and understand that's what you're doing through this link evidence, you can have a full link chain, meaning that you're connecting 4 or 5 different cards, starting from one end of your link all the way to the other. As long as you understand essentially what you're doing there, all you have to do then is just find the cards, right? So there's a couple important things about a link. The biggest thing, the biggest definition, or the biggest definer that is going to make your link good is the fact that it has a good warrant. And the reason you want a good warrant is for a couple of reasons. Number one is that the stronger that your warrant is, the stronger that your impact is, right? If we're talking about the Saudi Arabia topic that we have, that we need to pull out arms sales, if you advocate for the AF and say we are going to pull arms sales from Saudi Arabia, and then you read a card that says every time the United States has pulled arms sales, that's caused a decrease in terror by 0.0001%, right? That's not very, sure, that's a link. That's linking, our arms sales to being, pulling out arms sales to being good because we're reducing terrorism or something like that. However, the impact there, it's hard to even quantify into, is that one terroristic incident that is prevented? Is that one life that is lost? How do you quantify the impact? And also, does that even matter in the round, right? So if your link is really strong, that can lead you into really strong warrants, or your strong warrant can lead you into strong links, which allows you to, your strong warrant in your link can lead you to strong impacts, which allows you to extrapolate out, how many lives are lost, how much the economy grows, stuff like that, that happens when you vote for your side. The other important thing about having a good link and a good warrant in your link is the fact that it's much harder for your opponents to address, right? If we're talking about, the Saudi Arabia topic again. If you have a strong link that says that when we pull out arms sales, that's good because it's going to force Saudi Arabia to start listening to what the United States wants, right? And they're going to have to, that they're going to pull out of Yemen or something like that. I know that link is probably not very reasonable. But if you have a really good warrant to it that says that the reason Saudi Arabia does that is because they want to get our arms sales back or something like that, or, we have leverage on them now or something like that, then at the point at which there's a reason for this link, it's much harder for your opponents to address, and they're probably going to need a card rather than just indict your link and say, it doesn't make sense because they don't read a warrant. So with that said, I'm going to get into 3 examples that I have of fairly strong links, or just, examples of different, different advocacies, whether it's AF or neg or counterplan or something like that, or even disadvantage is one of them. But essentially the reason being that I know this can be like a lot of abstracts, but as soon as you can kind of see it in practice in a real link, then I think it can kind of make a lot more sense. So with that said, the first link that I have for you is on the pharmaceutical topic. This was November-December 2018, which was the United States federal government should impose price controls on the pharmaceutical industry. I think the only important distinction here is to make is that essentially the AF is saying that we should impose price controls. They are implemented by the government, and that they're not necessarily distinct in what drugs we are going to be implementing price controls on, but that can be pretty much assumed by what some of these contentions are. So with that said, the first contention that we read was opioid crisis, and so opioid crisis was saying that we start with the first link, which is again this uniqueness evidence, saying that in the status quo, drug prices continue to increase dramatically without an increase in R&D, research and development. This is trying to preempting our opponent's arguments, because we are AF, right? So a lot of the neg argument said we need to keep prices high because that's how we have money to go into research and development, which saves lives in the long term, yada yada yada. But what's important about this card is we're saying that in the status quo, drug prices are increasing dramatically. And so we're saying that's a big problem. And we say also that that's causing the opioid crisis, as we say right here. But there's multiple links into when we vote for the AF and we reduce prices, that's going to help solve for the opioid crisis. So there's a couple of ways. First is the fact that it's going to allow some of these medicines that are really effective to be used. So we say that this naloxone or whatever can bring victims of opioid users back from the brink of death if they haven't overdosed or something. However, they're able to save thousands of lives or whatever. But the price is skyrocketed, putting it beyond the reach of first responders, right? So first responders don't have it in their grasp, meaning that when they're responding to someone who overdoses, they can't use this type of drug that potentially could save the person's life. And so we say that's causing a lot of lives to be lost. The other link that we have about high prices is the fact that it's making it so that doctors aren't going to be prescribing these expensive brand name drugs. And we also talk about here too that they're inaccessible to government programs like Medicare and Medicaid. The importance there is as well is that essentially the high prices is making it so these drugs can't be used and essentially preventing lives from being saved. So we say that in the status quo, that's, blah, 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 that's a big problem that's causing the opioid crisis to go up and up. However, when you vote for the AF and we reduce prices, that's going to be able to lead us to lives being saved, right? So the impact there, or the link there is, talking about how there's a problem currently, and this problem is causing, the opioid crisis. However, when you vote for the AF and we solve this problem, we solve these increasing prices, that's going to help us solve for the problem that these increasing prices have been causing, right? With that said, I'll go on to the next example. This one is on the January 2019 topic, which is the United States federal government should prioritize reducing the debt over promoting economic growth. The importance here is that we say, like, our case idea was that the way that we reduce the federal debt is through a policy called PAYGO. So in this, we also have kind of this uniqueness evidence in the sense that we're literally just defining this is the status quo, this is what we're advocating for, this is what's different between the status quo and what we're advocating for. The difference, we say that currently, we have CUTGO, we're advocating for PAYGO. The difference is that when Congress passes tax cuts, that they have to get that money from somewhere else, preventing the deficit from getting bigger and bigger, the deficit being the amount of money that we're spending that we're not making up in taxes. And so therefore that needs to be offset in the AF world. However, currently it doesn't need to be offset. Then we have a couple links as to how PAYGO is going to pass and how that leads into our impacts. The first link is that currently Congress is looking at PAYGO, which means it's like the most likely thing that's going to be passed if you vote for the AF. That's pretty much what our link argument there is. The second is that we say that PAYGO, if implemented and preventing Trump's 2017 tax cuts, that would help reduce the deficit by half, right? So we're saying that this is how it's going to reduce the deficit in the future if Congress were to pursue tax cuts, right? So the overall importance here is that we're saying that this is what PAYGO is, right? That's what we do with our unique evidence, defining like what the status quo is, what we're advocating for, and then we talk about how we're going to lead to our advocation, right? We talk about how Congress is currently looking at what we're talking about, but that also in the near future, or if we would have had PAYGO in the past, it would have helped our deficit. And so we say, and then we get on to leading that into our impacts because we show that if PAYGO would have been effective, that's why we should pass it because it's going to help in the future. With that said, the last link that I have for you guys is actually a disadvantage. Basically, it's a negative argument saying that the AF is bad, and here's why. Or the AF might be good in this area, but it's going to be causing these other bad impacts or this other bad link chain, right? So essentially, the reason or the topic that I'm reading this on is the September-October topic for 2017, which was essentially saying the United States should implement THAAD or missile defense system or missile defense capabilities within South Korea for South Korea's own benefit. Essentially, we're saying that, sure, like, maybe these missile defense systems are effective or something like that, but we're reading this argument saying that the implementation of these missile defense systems is causing China to ramp up their missile programs, right? And so we identify these missile programs as hypersonic gliders, and we say that these hypersonic gliders can't be stopped currently by any defense system in the United States. And so the link is that if the AF implements this THAAD program or implements, other missile defense programs, that's going to cause China to increase their spending in hypersonics. And then there's 3 links into why that can cause nuclear war in the future. And then we get into the three links from there. Obviously the impacts of nuclear war don't have to be that well hashed out, like it's going to cause like millions of lives to be lost, right? At the point at which one side can prove nuclear war happens, and they probably just win the round. Right, but essentially we are linking into how, when we implement THAAD, that's going to lead us closer to the brink of nuclear war. So the 3 links are that when they increase their spending in hypersonics, that causes an incentive for preemptive strikes. The warrant here is the fact that preemptive strikes, meaning that China would strike first before a war is actually started. The warrant here is that because these are so effective, essentially the first country that strikes first is going to have a better chance of winning the war, because like you can't stop these missiles, but you're going to want to strike first to like attack and like blindside your opponent first, which is going to like leave the most amount of damage, right? The second link here is that hypersonics have been tied to nuclear development in the past, and it's kind of like a historical, but also just like in the past couple of years, like what hypersonics are signaling to the global stage. And then the last is that hypersonics are undermining mutually assured destruction. Basically, mutually assured destruction, we argue, is what's preventing us from nuclear war. However, hypersonics aren't. Like, hypersonics are so good that they lead us even past that, right? So that's why the risk that we end up using them or that China would end up using them is pretty high. With all that said, hopefully a lot of things, links make sense. I don't know, a lot of times the link can come down to literally just explaining what your case is and what your argument is, because at the point at which you have like that argument hashed out pretty well, then your links kind of fall into place. Essentially, I think the important thing to remember about a link, I know that I kind of went over a lot of different things that kind of happen at the top of your case that lead you into the link is the fact that your link is overall relating your advocacy to an impact, right? You're saying why your advocacy matters and what your advocacy is going to do, whether that's the AF, whether that's a neg. So with that said, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for links.